The Texas gunman who murdered 19 children and 2 teachers posted an online message warning that he was going to shoot up a school minutes before the attack. He's 18 years of age. Salvador Ramos was shot and killed by authorities at Robb Elementary School in 𝐜𝐸𝐲𝐜𝐡. President Biden will visit Texas in the coming days to talk to families of the victims. Well, look, we're staying with that story now. Beside me now is Dr. Shahom Das, and he is a forensic psychiatrist, and he's here to, give you an indication, get inside the mind of this Salvador Ramos, 18 years of age, and just, the horrors that man has committed. His profile, when a professional like you looks at it, is it typical? Is it unexpected? Is it expected?
First of all, thank you very much for having me on your show. So yes, there is a typical profile for mass shooters. They tend to be overwhelmingly male, 95, 98% of the time they're male, tend to be Caucasian, they tend to be quite young. So generally for school shootings, they tend to be about 17 or 18, but for other public shootings, they're in their 30s. So he certainly fits some of the profile. But what I think is more interesting is the psychological profile. So people who commit these kinds of atrocities usually have some sort of childhood trauma, and they tend to feel disillusioned, isolated and marginalised. And that's exactly the picture that we get with Salvador Ramos.
Well, it's interesting that he said he was going to kill his grandmother, and he did.
Yep, they often telegraph their intentions. And I think that's because, in their minds, because they're so marginalised, they feel like losers to a degree. Sometimes they don't have jobs, they don't have friends, they don't have romantic relationships, all of which were relevant for Salvador Ramos. So they want some sort of infamy, and they see this as a final act, a call of a suicide.
But they want to know that people know that they're going to do it, that they're not going to be insignificant or ignored. That's the perversion about it, isn't it?
Exactly. So to them, because they don't have an identity, this is a way of gaining notoriety very quickly and very publicly.
Someone like him, why is there the need to broadcast what he's going to do before?
I think it's just, again, it's his narcissism, it's him wanting to show off and telegraph what he's capable of. But what I think is particularly interesting, Rosie, is the way that he did this. So he took pictures of his gun and he tried to circulate them on social media, and then he contacted one of his friends on social media who he didn't really know that well. And the way that he approached her and asked her to recirculate or repost his pictures was very entitled, it was very aggressive. It was a demand rather than a request. And when she questioned this, he was quite hostile towards her. So I think that shows a sense of entitlement about this young man.
There's a couple of ways of approaching this. People will say guns are the problem, the availability of guns and the acceptability of guns could well be the problem. But then the other way of looking at it is that are a number of young men like him, are they spottable? Could you detect them in advance?
That's a very good question. I think ultimately the problem is that even though there are warning signs, there are telltale signs, everything that I was talking about before, people who are quite isolated and marginalised, perhaps not interacting with the public. The problem is there's so many people like that, and only a very, very small proportion actually go on to commit such atrocious crimes. So I think it's really difficult. It's possible to spot the signs.
But having resources within the community to be able to track and watch these people.
Absolutely, and something else which we've not yet touched on is mental health issues.
Yeah.
So we know that about 2/3 of gunmen in America who commit these mass shootings have some sort of mental health issue, but then again, 50% of Americans do anyway. So there is a statistical lean towards this, but it's not that big. And of those people, about 10 to 15% are actually driven by their mental illness. So they'll hear voices or they'll have psychotic delusions. These are exactly the kind of patients that I assess. But again, it's about spotting it early enough and enforcing or encouraging treatment.
How successful can treatment like that be?
I think if you can catch somebody before they escalate to this level of violence, then absolutely treatment can be successful. It kind of depends on the situation. So if it's a very overt mental illness like a psychosis, then that can be treated relatively simply by potentially detaining somebody, giving them antipsychotics. If it's more of a social issue or a background depression, then that's a societal issue, which is much harder to deal with.
But Shahom, talking about the societal issue, why pick on you know, they've got all these guns, they're armed to the teeth, yet they pick on the most vulnerable, the most innocent quite often. Once again, school children. Why?
I think some of it's a power dynamic. So it's the easiest way to do something where they can control and they can dominate over somebody else because they're easy targets, as you say, they're very vulnerable. But what's interesting is that usually there's some kind of grievance with these mass shooters. It's either against individuals, like school bullies, or it's against institutions, and sometimes it's wider, so it's like a religious or a misogynistic or racist viewpoints, and they just take it to the extreme to express themselves.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much indeed. That's 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐜𝐡 𝐅𝐨𝐫. He is a forensic psychiatrist there, and that is his view on the profile of Salvador Ramos, the mass killer there in Texas. Thank you very much indeed.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.